For thousands of years, it's been one of the world's great mysteries. Just how were the pyramids built so deep in the Egyptian desert? Ask Grok who built the pyramids, and you get the textbook answer, the same one your teacher gave you. But a few people tried something no historian ever would. They handed Grok every measurement ever taken of the Great Pyramid, every survey, every alignment, every tolerance, and told it to ignore the consensus and read only the numbers. What came back was not a name and not a date. It was a pattern the standard story cannot explain, hiding in the leveling, the angles, the proportions of the stone itself. Nobody expected the machine to find it, and it does not stop where the history books do. The story we were given, at the mathematical knowledge that is encoded into the Great Pyramid, the measurements that are used in it. So a few people did the unthinkable. They took the plainest tool we have right now, an artificial intelligence, pointed it at the oldest question we own, and told it to answer without flinching. What it found does not fit the story we were raised on. And to see why that should bother you, you have to hear that story first. Told straight. Start with what is actually out there. A thing standing in the desert outside Cairo that by every honest measure should not exist. Should not exist as a figure of speech. Should not exist as a problem of physics and math and time. 2.3 million blocks of stone, each one weighing somewhere between 2 and 15 tons, stacked into a mountain 481 feet tall, fitted together so tight that in places you cannot slide a sheet of paper into the seam. For nearly 4,000 years, it was the tallest thing human hands had ever made. And nothing on Earth came close. Walk up to it now, and it does not read as a building. It reads as a landform. The Great Pyramid was built the level of technological sophistication far in excess of anything that we have today. Something the planet grew, not something a person stacked. You crane your neck, and you still cannot take the top of it in. That is the object. Now here is the story we tell about it. And I want you to hear it fair because it is a good story and it is not stupid. The people who put it together were not guessing, and they were not fools. This is a careful, evidence-based account that serious people spent more than a century building, and it deserves to be said plainly before anybody lays a finger on it. It goes like this. Around 2560 before the Common Era, in the 4th dynasty of ancient Egypt, a pharaoh named Khufu ordered a tomb. Over roughly 20 years, tens of thousands of workers, not slaves, forget the movies, organized crews of skilled labor, quarried limestone right out of the plateau, floated the finer stone down the Nile, dragged the blocks across wetted sand on wooden sledges, and levered them into place with rope and muscle and a lot of patience. Their tools were copper chisels, stone hammers, wooden mallets. Their instruments were knotted cords, plumb lines, wooden squares, and shallow troughs of water to find a level line. That is it. That is the whole toolkit. And here is the part people skip. The evidence for all of it is real. It is sitting in the sand right now. Archaeologists dug up the worker villages on the Giza Plateau, the bakeries, the breweries, the barracks, the cattle bones. They found healed fractures in the laborers' bones, which means somebody set those breaks and cared for them, which means these people were valued enough to mend. There are papyrus records, actual ink logging the day-to-day of moving stone. There are quarry marks and tool marks, and the names of work gangs painted in red ochre on hidden blocks deep inside. Crews who called themselves things like the Friends of Khufu. Human fingerprints all over it. The builders were proud of the thing. They signed it. Picture the village at dusk. The bread oven still warm. Beer being poured. Somebody with a set arm that a healer bound and kept an eye on. Gangs shouting their crew names across the yard the way work crews have always shouted them. Real people. A real town proud of the mountain they were raising. So when somebody tells you the pyramids are a mystery, understand that mainstream archaeology has a real answer. A coherent one backed by stuff you can hold in your hand. It is not a cover-up. It is the best reconstruction trained people could build. And for the big question, who organized the labor and why it holds up? It really does. The crack in the story. It's not a problem that's been totally solved. And, I've given my suggestions. I've tried to base them in the landscape, but, a lot of it is still inference. But there is a problem, and it does not shrink the longer you look. It grows. It gets worse the closer you put your eye to the stone, because that story explains the labor beautifully, the organization, the food, the crews, the motivation, the names in red. What it does not explain, what it has never really explained, is the precision. The story tells you who carried the stones. It does not tell you how those stones got cut and fitted and leveled and aimed to a standard that in a few very specific and measurable ways brushes right up against what we can pull off today with lasers, with diamond saws, with satellites, with 4,000 extra years of knowing things. And that gap is the crack somebody decided to point Grok at. Here is what they actually did because it matters. They did not ask it the friendly version. They handed it the raw file. Every survey, every geological scan, every astronomical alignment, every engineering tolerance ever recorded about the Great Pyramid of Khufu. All of it at once with one instruction. Analyze this. No loyalty to any existing theory. Report only what the numbers actually say. They picked a machine for a reason. It has got no career to protect, no tenure to lose, no professor down the hall who is going to frown at the wrong conclusion. It does not care whether the answer is comfortable. And that turns out to matter more than you would think because muscle is cheap and time is patient. 100,000 people can drag almost anything across sand if you give them enough rope and enough years. But accuracy is a different animal. You cannot brute force your way to a fraction of a millimeter. You cannot sweat your way to an alignment tighter than a modern surveyor's. Precision is not effort. Precision is knowledge, a record of what the builders actually understood. And it is in the precision, not the size, not the weight, not the labor, that the numbers start to misbehave. You can picture the muscle, 10,000 backs, ropes biting, sand churned to soup under the sledges. You cannot picture the accuracy the same way. It just sits there in the stone, quiet and exact, and refuses to be explained by more men and more rope. So, where do you start? Not with aliens. Not with lost continents. Not with anything you have heard whispered at 2 in the morning on the internet. You start where any honest person starts, with the floor. The floor. The most boring measurement an engineer can take. Is the thing level? Is the ground under it flat? And the second Grok looked at that one dull number, the comfortable version of history started very quietly to fall apart because the base of the Great Pyramid is not roughly level. It is not approximately flat across a footprint more than 230 meters on a side. A platform you could lay several football fields across. The whole foundation is level to within just over 2 centimeters across 2½ football fields. And once you understand what that took with copper and water and wood, that is the moment this stops being a history lesson. Let me put it in your hand, because the number does not land on its own. Picture a sheet of glass the size of a city block. Across that whole surface, the highest point and the lowest point are off by less than the width of 2 of your fingers. Now build that glass not as one poured sheet, but out of millions of separate stone blocks, some as heavy as a small truck, each one trimmed and seated by hand. And do it with no laser level, no optical transit, nothing we would even call a precision tool. Water in a trough, a wooden square, a plumb line, your own 2 eyes. Picture the plateau while they work. The heat coming off the sand in waves. The light so flat and hard it hurts. And somewhere in all that, a crew getting a floor the size of a small town leveled to the width of 2 fingers. Before we go further into that floor, and it goes further, do the one thing that keeps a trail like this alive. Subscribe. Not for me, for the next number. There are 4 more of them coming, and every single one is worse for the textbook than the last. If you want to be here when this leads to the site nobody has looked at yet, that button is how you do not miss it. The question they put to Grok was narrow on purpose. Not who built it, not why, just this. Given the tools the record says they had: a stretched cord, a trough of water, a wooden right angle, what are the odds a crew hits this kind of flatness across this distance and holds it on all 4 sides? Grok did not answer with a story. It answered with a number. And the number was bad news for the textbook. It called the results statistically improbable, not impossible. It was careful about that. Improbable. The kind of thing you would expect to fail way more often than it works. The kind of tolerance that slips the second a crew gets tired. The second the sun warms the water. The second a cord stretches a hair in the heat. Every one of those little failures is a crew starting a section over. And they did not start over into something sloppy. They started over into something we would struggle to match with a laser. Section after section, side after side, a whole town of people holding a tolerance the desert was fighting them on the entire time. And here is what makes it worse. We do not even build to this standard now. We do not need to. When engineers pour a foundation for a skyscraper today, the allowed slope across a big slab is looser than what is out there at Giza. We give ourselves room, and nobody loses sleep because a building does not care if its floor is off by a finger's width. It stands, the elevators run, nobody notices. By the standard we actually use, that foundation is far more precise than it has any reason to be. Think about what that means. They did not just clear a high bar. They blew past the bar modern engineering calls good enough for a tomb. Why? That is the question the floor starts asking, and it follows you the rest of the way. Because precision costs. Every extra sliver of accuracy is more time, more skill, more remeasuring, more rejected stone, more work poured into something that, near as anyone can tell, does nothing. A tomb does not need a floor flat to a finger's width. The dead do not care about slope. So, somebody paid a fortune in labor for an accuracy a corpse would never use. That is not how people spend effort. Not unless the accuracy was the whole reason they were there. So, it was not for function, which leaves two doors. Either it was an accident, the leftover of methods so refined this kind of accuracy just fell out of them, or it was the point. Either they could not help being this exact, or they were trying to tell us something with it. Grok did not pick a door. It logged it and moved on. The way you file away a detail that does not fit and refuse to forget it. And then it looked up from the ground, and the next number was worse. The aim. Grok lifts its attention off the ground and turns to how the whole thing sits in the desert, which direction it faces. The second number is, if anything, uglier than the first. Because the Great Pyramid is not just level, it is aimed. The four sides do not face roughly toward the compass points. They face true north, true south, true east, true west. And they do it with an accuracy I honestly do not love saying out loud. The miss from true north is on the order of a few arc minutes. An arc minute is 1/60th of a single degree. The whole horizon all the way around you is 360 degrees, 21,600 arc minutes. Across all of that, the builders missed perfect north by a handful. An amount you cannot see, cannot feel. You would need an instrument just to catch the error. There is no version of that you do by feel. You cannot eyeball your way to it. It is either measured correctly by someone who knew exactly what they were measuring, or it is a miracle. Grok does not deal in miracles, so it kept the first option and kept staring at it. And here is why that is insane. True north is not the north a compass gives you. A compass points at the magnetic pole, and that thing drifts. It wanders. It is not fixed. True north is geographic north, the actual axis the whole planet spins on. There is no rock to aim at, no landmark. To find it, you read the sky. You watch the stars all night and find the one still point they all turn around, the pin the heavens rotate on. Then you drag that invisible point down out of the sky onto a line scratched in the sand. Then you hold that line dead straight across 230 meters of construction without letting it wander a hair. Do that outside. No screen, no readout, no second chance if you blink. Just a person on a cold plateau night after night. Neck bent back, tracking the slow wheel of the stars until the still point finally shows itself, and then trusting a scratch in the sand to carry it. Miss by a hair up there, and the whole mountain ends up pointing at the wrong nothing. They did not miss. This is not accuracy a culture trips into. This is what you hit today with a survey-grade transit, with satellites, with instruments correcting themselves. Instruments that would not exist for another 4,000 years. And then Grok does the thing the textbook will not. It asks why anyone would need this. A tomb does not need to face true north. A temple does not. A monument to a dead king's glory does not require an alignment finer than a modern surveyor's. An alignment nobody watching could ever see, that no ceremony could ever use. The precision overshoots the purpose. It blows past every reason we can come up with. And when the accuracy runs that far ahead of the need, you are left with a thought you do not really want. That the accuracy was the need. That the aim was not a means to anything. That the aim was the message. That somebody stood on this plateau, way back in the dark, in the cold that comes off the desert at night, and went to impossible lengths to point a mountain of stone at the still center of the sky. Knowing almost nobody would ever notice, except maybe someone clever enough far enough down the line to measure it, and ask the one question that matters. The next number starts to answer it, and it hides inside something so simple a kid could draw it. The circle and the square. Take the perimeter of the base. Walk all four sides. Add up the whole distance around the bottom. Then take the original height, what it stood at before the centuries stole the capstone. Divide the first by the second. You do not get a clean number. You do not get anything you would land on by accident. You get near enough 2 times pi. 2 times that endless irrational number that ties a circle to the line across it. 3.1415. And it never stops, never repeats, never resolves. The perimeter relates to the height the exact way a circle's edge relates to its radius. A building of flat faces and hard edges, of triangles and squares, has a circle hiding inside its proportions. And it is not a loose match. It lands within a fraction of a percent. That sounds like nothing. It is not nothing. It is the difference between somebody stumbling near a number and somebody hitting it on the nose. And at this size, on the nose is not the kind of thing sand and rope hand you by luck. Now, the textbook has an answer for this, and it is a decent one, and Grok held it up and looked at it fair before walking past it. The idea is that it is an accident of how they measured. Say the Egyptians measured flat distances by rolling a drum and counting the turns and measured heights by stacking cubits. Measure the ground with a wheel and the sky with sticks. And pi sneaks into your numbers without you ever knowing its name. The wheel does the geometry for you. You get the circle without ever understanding the circle. Clean, elegant, and for one instance it holds up. But Grok was not looking at one instance. It was looking at the whole structure, every dimension it could pull. And it flagged that this ratio is not the only thing behaving strangely. It sits right next to a second one. And the second one, no rolling drum on earth can explain. That is where the floor really drops. The number that should not exist yet. Pi at least had a shape in the ancient world, even if the Egyptians never wrote the name down. This next one did not. It is the ratio we call phi, the golden ratio, 1.618, and on forever. The proportion your eye finds beautiful without knowing why. The spiral of a shell, the branch of a tree, the seeds packed into the face of a flower. And as far as the written record goes, nobody formally set phi down on paper until the Greek geometers did it. That is more than 2,000 years after the last casing stone went on this pyramid. 2,000 years. That is the gap between us and the Roman Empire. By everything we can actually prove, the golden ratio did not exist as a written idea when this thing was built. It was not due to show up for 20 more centuries. And there it is anyway in the relationship between the height and the base, in the slope of the faces, the angle those huge triangular sides lean in toward the sky. And this is where a bad feeling turns into something colder. Because you can argue, if you stretch, that pi rolled in on a measuring wheel. You cannot make that argument for phi. There is no drum you roll, no stick you stack, no innocent little procedure that smuggles the golden ratio into your numbers by accident. Phi has to be known to get used, understood, calculated, put there on purpose. Find it in one dimension, and a generous skeptic waves it off. Find it threaded through the height and the slope of the oldest monument out there, and that same skeptic runs out of room. It starts to read like a signature, like somebody left their handwriting in the stone in a language nobody would speak for 2,000 years. Run your hand along a face of the thing, and there is nothing there to feel. No inscription, no diagram, no proud little note saying we knew what this number was. Just the proportions sitting silent in the shape itself, waiting for somebody with the right tools and the right suspicion to come and measure it. That is a strange way to leave a message. It is also the only way that survives 4,000 years. Put the two side by side. Pi, the circle hiding in the square, and phi, the number that should not have existed yet. They have got something in common. Both are irrational. Both are infinite. Both are the kind of deep truth a civilization only reaches after a long, patient climb. The stuff that sits near the top of what a culture can figure out about how reality is built. And both are sitting here in the oldest of these monuments right at the start when, by the standard story, the builders were swinging copper chisels and dragging stones on sleds. The math is not primitive in climbing on this reading. It is already at the summit, which pushes the next question in the only direction left, out off the pyramid entirely toward the size of the planet it is standing on. The world folded into the stone. This is the one that draws the loudest fight. And I want to be straight with you the way Grok was. This is a claim, not a proof. Here it is a claim. The people who push it take the pyramid's own measurements and multiply them by a single number, 43,200. Take the original height before the casing got stripped and the capstone vanished. Multiply it by that, and they say the answer lands near the polar radius of the Earth, the distance from the planet's center to its pole. Then take the perimeter of the base, all four sides walked end to end, multiply by the same 43,200, and it lands near the circumference of the Earth around the equator. Same multiplier. 2 dimensions of the building, 2 dimensions of the planet, one number tying them together. Like the thing is not a tomb at all, like it is a scale model of the world. And the multiplier is not random, which is the part that gets under people's skin. 43,200 is the number of seconds in 12 hours. It is tied to the spin of the planet today, sliding into night. Finding it as the bridge between a building and the size of the globe is the kind of coincidence that makes you want to stop calling it one. Stand back far enough and the whole idea is dizzying. A pile of stone in one desert, quietly holding the measurements of the entire planet it sits on. If it is real, somebody had to know the shape of a world they could never step off of and never see whole. But I promised you straight. And Grok was straight too. This one has a real counterargument, and it is not weak. Go hunting through any big, precisely built structure with a free hand to pick which number you multiply by, and you can force almost any famous figure to fall out of it. The Earth's dimensions are known. The pyramids are known. Give a determined person enough freedom in the multiplier, and the rounding and matches appear. That is a fair hit. It is exactly why this belongs in the column of provocations, not proofs. But it is not sitting there alone. It is stacked on top of the leveling and the alignment and the pi and the phi. Grok's problem was never any single one of these. It was the pile. What Grok would not say. The standard answer to all of it is that these are artifacts. Accidents of the qubit numbers that fall out of anything big if you go looking hard enough. And Grok had literally been told to look for exactly that, the boring explanation, the one that makes the mystery evaporate. What it kept hitting instead was a pattern too consistent, too layered to wave off in one motion. Leveling that beats modern tolerance. An aim to true north tighter than any ceremony needed. Pi in the perimeter, phi in the height and the slope, and the disputed but stubborn business of the Earth's own size folding out of the height, and the base off a number pulled from the clock of the spinning world. Take any one alone, and you can argue it away. That is true, and I am not going to pretend it is not. But Grok was not weighing them one at a time. It was weighing the whole stack. And here is the most honest thing it did, so do not miss it. It did not name the builders. It did not say aliens. It did not point at a lost continent or some vanished race and crown them the architects. It did something quieter and somehow worse. It looked at the standard explanation. Pharaohs, copper, sledges, 20 years, a Bronze Age people raising the most precise structure on the planet with the tools of their age. And on the numbers alone, it called that explanation insufficient. Not wrong in every part. Not a lie. Insufficient. Not big enough by its own assumptions to hold everything standing at Giza. Read that back. The most powerful pattern finder we have ever built looked at the story we teach children and said quietly, this does not cover it. Take one detail. Grappling back to way inside the structure. Above the room the books call the king's chamber. The ceiling there is roofed with granite beams, so heavy a single one weighs about as much as a large loaded truck. And above that ceiling, the builder stacked hollow spaces, one over the other, 5 of them, to a modern eye that reads as a load-relieving system, a deliberate design to spread the crushing weight of the mountain overhead away from the room below. Now, here is the honest complication a storyteller would cut, and Grok would not. Some of those beams are cracked. They fractured probably during construction or in an early quake. And the fact that the ceiling still holds anyway, cracks and all, is the argument because the thing was engineered with enough understanding of load and failure that the damage got contained, absorbed, routed around, the chamber never came down. That is not people guessing. That is people who understood how force moves through stone well enough to plan for the stone breaking 4,500 years ago. At the very start where the timeline says that understanding should barely be there. Stand in that room, and it does not feel like a tomb. It feels like the inside of a machine. Bare granite walls, square and cold. Sound going dead flat the second it leaves your mouth. Above your head, out of sight, a truck's worth of stone hangs on beams that already split once and held. You are standing under a crack that has not moved in 4,500 years. And under the whole plateau, there is the old fight about the weathering on the Sphinx, the mark some geologists read as heavy rain damage in a desert that has not seen that kind of rain since long before the pharaohs. It is a disputed reading, but it sits on the pile too. So, Grok set the plain version aside where the numbers forced it to, and it left the hole empty, and it pointed at the empty hole, and it laid out what would have to be true to fill it. For possibilities, and it would not choose between them. 1. A lost technology the Egyptians had and somehow forgot. 2. Inherited knowledge handed down from a culture older than the dynasties. 3. A civilization wiped out by the catastrophe at the end of the last ice age, its survivors carrying their math into a new world like refugees carrying heirlooms. And 4. The one it flagged only because the evidence it said does not strictly rule it out, an origin that was never human at all. It did not pick one. It is not Grok's place to pick, and it knew that, and so do we. What it handed back instead was the thing the comfortable story works hardest to keep you from feeling. Permission to admit the answer we were given does not fully fit the stone. The leveling is real. The aim is real. The math is real. And the likeliest truth, the one the evidence keeps leaning toward, is also the one we can barely